I'm Frankie Boyle. There comes a time in every comedian's career when they decide to do travelogues. Often it's because they want to connect with people, and their attempts to do so through more prestigious TV formats have failed. I've decided to tour around some smaller theatres in Scotland to get my show ready for a big run in Glasgow and Edinburgh. In my sort of career as a stand-up comedian, I've spent a lot of time away from home. I've masturbated in so many hotel rooms that nowadays every time I see a miniature fridge, I automatically ejaculate. So I've decided to reconnect with home and go on a tour of Scotland in this van, which unfortunately has a miniature fridge in it. I've already had to pay a £90 cleaning fee. I'll drive around Scotland, see stuff, get on stage, and then do jokes about the stuff I've seen. Unbelievably, that's the premise of this entire show. That's me looking at stuff already. Pre-titles. So that being said, you're either with me or against me. I'll hit the road as soon as this dude finds the car keys. Watch me train to be a marriage counsellor in Orkney. Wherever the tour takes me, I'll be making friends and avoiding eye contact as I take part in the world's slowest hokey-cokey. And from the top deck of that ferry, I'll fight every impulse to jump into the beckoning ocean as I'm filmed on a long lens by a flying pervert.
I think I get less interested in sex as I get less capable of having sex. I couldn't really lift a woman up against a wall anymore. Depends on the wall, obviously, but it's very few women's sexual fantasy to be jackknifed over a garden wall. Your options really narrow in your 40s. You're pretty much reduced to going out with people that you've already gone out with. The sexual equivalent of eating out of the bin. I mean, there's upsides, obviously. You know, I've got kids now, that's amazing. One of your orgasms now has a face. It's mind-blowing.
I'm starting my final journey on this tour. I'm travelling south from Oban back to Glasgow, possibly stopping along the way to buy a pasty cooked by a light bulb. I'm leaving Oban behind, but part of me will always be here, in the form of DNA on the hotel room ceiling. Along the route, I'll have a think about something, in that way you do when you're contractually obliged to have a theme. On this stretch, I'll think about creativity and how it applies to the ways in which Scotland thinks of itself, as well as meeting some remarkable people who create in their own unique way. Between Oban and Glasgow, there's some of Scotland's most majestic landscapes, and in amongst the breathtaking scenery lives one of the world's most celebrated and accomplished comic book writers.
Now we're off to Dunoon. We're going to go and see Grant Morrison. Grant is, the greatest comic book writer of his generation. He'll probably be remembered like something like Jack Kirby or something like that eventually. But more than that, he's a kind of ideas machine, really. I always feel I have problems and Grant has answers and ideas. So it's going to be interesting to talk to him about some of the stuff that I've been thinking about on this wee tour.
Grant Morrison has given new life to the world's most enduring superheroes, as well as creating original work that mixes the playful with the profound. Grant works between Scotland and Los Angeles, but he began life in the nightmare shadow of Europe's biggest stockpile of nuclear weapons, stored in the naval base at Coolport, just a few miles from his door. Many Scots would respond to a 4-minute warning by wondering if that was long enough to drag a sun lounger onto the patio, but for Grant, his upbringing ignited a formidable creativity.
The west of Scotland, because it was a poor area, because it was a post-industrial area that could easily be spared during any potential nuclear cataclysm, everything was sited here. So I think a lot of working class people at the time felt really scared for their children. And so they brought us all up in an atmosphere of terror without realising it in the midst of the glory of the 60s.
Well, even into the 80s I had that. I remember, I had that drawing of a nuclear bomb under my pillow I used to sleep on for some reason. And there used to be like a car showroom across from us, and its alarm would go off, and that to me is the nuclear alarm as a kid.
The alarms, if you heard the siren, it was, oh my God, that's it. If a plane flew especially low overhead, that was the end of the world. It was a constant pressure, and how often did you dream of it? You know, it was, I constantly would dream of these post-apocalyptic landscapes.
And do you think it had an effect on your imagination?
Yeah, I think that the apocalypse hanging over you has a profound effect on your imagination. You're always trying to think of ways around it because it becomes an intractable problem as a child. There's a kind of horror to realise that, well, even my dad, who's this big, tough guy, is, you know, ex-soldier, he can do anything. He's scared of the bomb. My mum's scared of the bomb. She's smart. They're all scared of the bomb. So it was a problem that was hard to solve. It was like a Rubik's Cube that would go around your head as a kid. The solution to that problem was Superman. The Hulk can stand in front of an atom bomb and just get more power. Superman can shake it off and get a tan. So imaginatively, these things became, oh, well, okay, there's a way around this. And even if they're not real, all it took was the imaginative key. And I think that's probably why I've been unnaturally fixated with these things, because they did give me that way out of an existential conundrum.
Do you think of yourself as a particularly Scottish writer?
Did I think of myself as a Scottish writer? Always. I think the hideous love-hate relationship you have with this place, you're scarred by it. You know, your sense of humour is nihilistic and bleak in a way that has to be explained to people in other parts of the world who have never experienced anything like the weather here or the sense of crushing disappointment.
Is it just like there's a kind of Venn diagram of Catholicism and all its kind of bleakness and Presbyterianism and its stuff, and somewhere in the middle is developed this Scottish identity that's quite fatalistic and quite...
Yeah, I think there's a fatalism that comes from that, the Presbyterian strand, you know, the grave digging, the ghoul strand of Scottish culture. But there's this other strand, which I always think is that strange, the strand of dreams, you know, Robert Burns, Tam O'Shanter, like, you know, Justified Sinner, Hog, you know, that kind of gets shoved under the carpet. And I think it's important to realise that it's as strong as it's ever been. You know, J.K. Rowling came here to write Harry Potter. There's the strands of the weird are still part of the Scottish identity.
There's like a lot of contradictions to it, isn't there? Like Scottishness, because there's a lot of optimism, I think, in people, but there's also, like you say, like this kind of profound nihilism.
But the optimism's always tempered with this absolute bleak certainty that the minute you voice an optimistic thought, you'll be struck down by Scotland's God. You know, which Kristen, my wife, and I call sod. It's just, you know, like sod's lost. Sod is ever waiting for you to have a triumph, to have a moment of success, and instantly there'll be something will happen to undermine the whole thing.
I love Grant. I've never met anyone who puts such an inspired spin on the apocalyptic darkness inside the soul of Scotland. I'm now taking a dogleg from Dunoon to central Scotland, where I will set foot on some hallowed ground, Bannockburn. Scotland hasn't won much, not since Slimmer of the Year said it didn't count if you lost a limb to diabetes. But Robert the Bruce scored a decisive victory by beating the English at Bannockburn, making the overall score 1 to 7,000 to them. For a place that practices a lot, we're clearly not that good at fighting. In what looks like an opening scene from Casualty, I decided to learn what I could about weapons from battle reenactor John Lyons.
You must do a lot of Bannockburn stuff.
Yeah, a lot of Robert Bruce stuff. We like to do the ones we win.
Yeah. Well, it was a big win for Scotland, wasn't it? And famously, he fought in single combat with someone the day before the main battle.
English nobleman Henry de Bohun charged at the king. Robert Bruce waited to accept the charge of Henry de Bohun, and when he got close, he sidestepped him, stood up in his stirrups and smote him down with his battle axe, allegedly cutting all the way through his helmet, his skull and his collarbone.
A good start, innit?
It was a good omen.
Could we have a look at some of the swords and some of the weapons and stuff?
Yep, we've got our broadswords here, so I actually have this is a hand-and-a-half sword.
So the hand-and-a-half sword, that's what they used to call the bastard sword, isn't it? It's halfway between a broadsword and a short sword.
Yeah, it's actually got a longer blade. A footman's sword might be as much as 12 inches shorter. Every part of it is for killing people. This bit's the pommel. So you hold this hand up, and then we're going to smash somebody's skull in.
That's where the word pummeled comes from, isn't it?
That's right, yeah, pommeled. The other piece here, the quilliam, If you were to slide your blade down my blade, this would protect my hand. However, if I was to punch up like this against your chest and under your helmet, this would come into your throat here. Very messy, very hard to breathe, lots of blood. That's the murder punch.
Horrible phrase, murder punch.
Yeah.
Did you have a good night? No, I got murder punched. Should we have a go at it with the shields?
And should you slide down now?
Imagine heading down the pub in that, fucking Friday night.
Cheers, John. It's got to be awkward on the battlefield where you're trying to get your strap back in. Wait a minute. Shall we have a wee go at it very gently?
Okay.
Right, okay.
Good. You can see the concentration on your face there. So you're really
There's something about a huge sword that really concentrates the mind.
That's exactly, yeah.
I think you could get me quite easily if you tried.
Yeah, I could. What you're doing is pointing up,
Right.
okay? So you've got lots of armour on the top.
Yeah.
So if I was to come down like this, you need to get your sword down to block that.
Right.
That's right.
Ah, okay.
It's pretty good though, your footwork's good. That's it.
The change in where your hand needs to be and where your sword needs to be is really quick, isn't it?
Yeah, and the quicker it is, the more likely you are to succeed. That's one of my favourite ways of finishing people off in reenactment, is coming in for a big, obvious overhead. Everybody wants to put their sword up, and I just flick my wrist, and it's through the belly.
And what's it like to take one on the shield?
If I give you a gentle whack there, that doesn't hurt. If I start to hit a bit harder, you can feel it. It's not doing any damage, but you start to feel the impact
There's
there.
a shock. Thanks for showing us it all, John.
No problem.
There goes my helmet.
I've slowly circled and gently tapped swords together. So fuck you, Simon Shamma. I'm now ready to speak at length about Scotland's most famous king.
Robert the Bruce remains an inspiration to many in Scotland, having lived to 54. In 1305, Robert the Bruce, taking refuge from battle in a cave, was inspired by a spider to spend 4 days trapped in the bath. Robert went on to defeat the English at Bannockburn and then Berwick. Even today, as a mark of respect, everyone in Berwick continues to look defeated. The Battle of Bannockburn is perhaps the most famous of Scottish victories, closely followed by getting a London taxi driver to accept a Clydesdale Bank 20. Robert was a warrior, but also a cunning ruler who managed to use an alliance with France to capitalise on English fears of an invasion. Can you imagine if England had fallen under French rule? Right now, from Newcastle right down to Plymouth, they would be speaking louder English. Ultimately, France didn't invade, possibly because they needed England as a vital safety buffer between their own and Scottish cuisine. Robert led Scotland to its first war of independence, 700 years before Nicola Sturgeon took on his mantle and his haircut. And yet many people, I suppose, will only know him from the section of Braveheart where he was played by Angus MacFadyen, in a role so cherished by the makers of the film that they spelled his name wrong on the credits. Angus MacFadyen has been in the headlines here recently when a cinema chain didn't pick up his biopic of Bruce. A story caught on that the film was banned as a result of some pro-union conspiracy, rather than it just being a small-scale film based in a country people enjoy ignoring. But for the record, I'd like to state that my pornographic rewriting of the career of pop duo Hue and Cry was unfairly suppressed by a fearful British government.
With my edged weapons skills polished, I feel more than ready to head west back to Glasgow. Bannockburn still carries a message of Scottish glory and defiance. Somewhat less glorious, but equally defiant, are the messages daubed on Glasgow's walls. But recently, some of the aesthetics of street artists have become incorporated into civic murals. Once murals would have been popular for the chance to huff paint fumes, but today they're created to spread civic pride, celebrate heroes, and cover up quite a bit of racist graffiti. Glasgow's murals are remarkable, but what lies beneath is problematic. Many of our buildings come from a dark chapter in the city's history. Much of Glasgow's grandest architecture and wealth was created off the back of slavery in the British colonies, and some streets still commemorate the merchants who profited the most from trade in humans. I'm meeting with local councillor Graham Campbell in Glasgow's merchant city, who is uneasy with his city's shameful past.
I kind of always a bit conflicted at the fact that this is called the merchant city. It shouldn't be named after them, really, but let's say it's tobacco, sugar, cotton. Those are the three commodities. It started with tobacco. Glasgow's here because of the tobacco trade. You know, if you've got a cigarette habit, you got your tobacco from Glasgow. Glasgow's to blame for that.
Right.
All that cancer, it's all us. But we became rich because we monopolised the tobacco trade.
Why have we known so little about it historically?
Well, because Glasgow, unlike Liverpool, Bristol or London, doesn't have a conscious memory of actually selling slaves on a market. We were known for shipping the commodity, so we were at a distance from the trade itself, from the trading people. So anybody who was a merchant sold tobacco, then sugar, then cotton. They were, you know, up to their necks in slavery. You know.
And loads of streets around here are named after them.
Mm-hmm.
And like, see I say on stage, I'll go to people sometimes, you know, we benefited from slavery, so that's why we've got the Kingston Bridge and that's why we've got Jamaica Street and all that. And you can tell people going, oh, they've just never even heard that.
The evidence is in plain sight. I mean, this is Virginia Place, right? So Virginia is after the tobacco plantations. It's telling you, we're very proud of getting our tobacco wealth from slavery plantations, but we're not going to mention the slavery bit. Yeah. Jamaica Street, yeah, of course, that whole spot on the Clyde. I mean, that was where you sailed away to Jamaica to go and make your fortune. I suppose people need to envision that just how Scots were involved in Jamaica. About 1/3 of the white plantocrats were Scots.
As the profits from the plantations in the New World flooded in, Glasgow began to expand and was transformed.
Every one of the major buildings on this area was paid for by sugar plantation slavery. And, you know, plantations is a nice word for it. They were death camps for forced labour till they died. It was cheaper to work them to death and then replace them with another one coming from West Africa, from another slave ship.
So what do you think about the whole idea, like maybe changing the names of streets? And
I wanted the name to stay up there, but I want it also to say that Ingram was the such and such owner of plantation slavery, or that Glassford was the person who, you know, exploited people. I want it to say where they got their money from. I'm a Campbell, you know, my name is Graham Campbell. You couldn't get more Scottish than that. You know, my name is proof that the Scots are part of my history. When you're part of the crime scene, you can't let the evidence walk away.
Glasgow has resembled a crime scene for many comedians. It's a city with such a cavalier attitude to drink and drugs that a common greeting here is simply the words, "What's happening?" I've played at the King's Theatre countless times. I mean, I could count them. I can't be fucked. It's much bigger than the venues I've played on this tour so far, but often that just means there's twice the mob to chase me afterwards.
I think there'll be upsides to Brexit, obviously. I think it'll be nice for the Irish to watch a British famine. I wonder if English politicians have just forgotten what Northern Ireland is like. To me, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland are like two halves of one bipolar personality. Let's get the jolly old fiddle out and stick it through some cunt's head. It terrifies me over there. Even just the number of places that begin with the word kill. I'm from Kill a Few More. Just up the road from Kill 'em All Again. My parents are from Donegal. I know it's very fashionable at the minute for comedians to have their parents on a TV show with them. Not an option if your parents are 80 and from Donegal. I don't trust elevators. And I'll tell you what else I don't trust. Ham. My parents have very, very mournful Donegal voices. Very, very sad voices indeed. My dad could make the lyrics to Zippity-Doo-Dah sound like a fucking cancer diagnosis. When I was growing up, there was still quite a lot of anti-Irish racism in Glasgow, which had two parts to it. One was Irish people are really stupid, and the other part was Irish people are taking Scottish folks' work, which wasn't even true, right? It's an incredible self-own when you think about it. If they import any more idiots, I'm going to be out of a fucking job here. The Irish people finding it quite ironic that it took the Scottish people a long time to get that one. When I first went down to London as a teenager, that had anti-Scottish racism, and that had two parts to it. One was, Scottish people are all alcoholics, and I was. And the other part was, Scottish people are all really mean. They're really tight with money. That doesn't even make sense. I don't know how many alcoholics you've met. They tend not to be brilliant at budgeting. Of all the mornings I woke up going, oh, what the fuck did I do last night? I never discovered that I'd changed energy provider. Oh, here's a joke that goes really differently in England from the way it goes in Scotland. See if you can work out why. When I was at school, there were two guys in my class who were really badly bullied, but luckily it didn't affect them in later life because they both committed suicide. I'm not kidding, that gets a huge laugh in England. That gets a huge, uncomplicated laugh. Whereas by the time you get to Glasgow, people are going, yeah, they probably did. Sad story. I was taken down from my school's wall of fame. I salute them for doing it, I admire them for doing it. It was because I did a joke about this guy, and he was a brilliant guy, he was a wonderful human being, but it was his job to teach us sex education. So he'd come round once a month and preach the withdrawal method, and he had 9 children. And a twitch. I'm always amazed the Catholic Church still take the moral high ground about anything. After the stuff the priests did, even that incense was just so that they could create a fog that they could emerge from. You'd smell that at school, everyone would scatter. One wee asthmatic boy would go missing. What happened to Gregor? The last I saw, he was being raped by a cloud.
Like a 16-year-old Labrador heading to the vets, sadly I've come to the end of my journey. Where better to reflect on the vibrant pulse of modern Scotland than at the top of Glasgow's necropolis? I hope to be buried here myself someday, probably in about 6 months. Maybe 7 if I can give up crack, which I can't.
When I look back on the last month or so of this tour, I see a Scotland that's in quite a predicament, filled with wonderful, open, talented, generous people, and owned by arseholes. About a quarter of the country is sporting estates, given over to people shooting grouse, a sort of chicken and drag. I actually grew up on a sporting estate. We always gave someone a head start before we mugged them. Another problem here is this inaccurate idea we have of ourselves as a historically oppressed nation. In the late 18th century, Scots owned 30% of Jamaica. Now we own approximately 30% of our own furniture and teeth. We weren't colonised by England. We were complicit with the British Empire's colonial endeavours, but have conveniently decided to redefine ourselves as another of its victims. A bit like Rose West hearing the police sirens and quickly burrowing under some paving slabs. Our history even before that isn't really that of a proud nation seeking self-determination. Scotland was historically a thing passed around among the powerful, in much the way that nowadays they might pass around a sexy orphan. The long death of the Union has led to Scottish culture being increasingly marginalised and patronised. When James Kelman won the Booker Prize, he accepted by saying, "My culture and my language have the right to exist, and no one has the authority to dismiss them." It's an incredible thing for someone to have to say, to have to insist on their own validity, their right to speak in their own voice. I think that in the years ahead of us, there will be a lot of new Scottish voices charting us away from the cultural cringe and the nuclear missile-based status and the food banks and the religious neuroses and the difficulty that we have, let's be honest, in allowing ourselves to find joy in each other and towards a new enlightenment, of which we're well capable now that we've had a good long rest.